this time, my wood pile's soaking wet, and I have to pour the wood in there, and it gets super hot, and the wood's like steams, and then it takes forever. Mine's the same way. I'm getting tons of BTUs out of it. Love it.
All right, grab a seat. We'll get going today.
No, your kids come into this. Okay, it's a week from tonight. Okay. All right. Well, I just asked Loie, and she goes, "I have to talk to my dad." Okay. All right. All right.
Genesis 32. And we'll begin today with the question that has plagued mankind forever. Which is more difficult, to forgive or to be forgiven?
To forgive.
All right, to forgive. We have one.
I have to agree.
All right, we have another one to forgive.
I think it's an individual thing. It just depends on each of our individual personalities.
Okay.
So for me, would be, I think, to be forgiven.
All right. I think we can argue it either way. And we're not here to do that today, but I mean, and here's why I say that. All right. Because if you say it's more difficult to forgive, I believe you're right. Because when you forgive someone, you're doing at least two things. You're choosing to overlook the pain of the past, and you're choosing to give the offender another chance. So you're right, it's more difficult to forgive. Unless, of course, it's more difficult to be forgiven. In which case, you're correct. I sound like a politician, don't I? You're correct. Whenever you decide to be forgiven, you're doing at least three things. Number one, you're admitting your guilt. Two, you're accepting forgiveness. And three, you're agreeing to a new course of action. So, to forgive or to be forgiven all depends on your point of view, right? Diane had it earlier. And whether you're the offender or the victim. The real truth is that both are very difficult. And that's the message of our text today in chapter 32 and chapter 33. But one thing I think we can all agree on, whether you are forgiving or being forgiven, this should be your goal. Healing, reconciliation, reunion, restoration, and tearing down the walls that separate. Well, 20 years to think. Our text today deals with the painful hurt of the past as Jacob and Esau are going to meet after 20 years. These two brothers. And during the time in Haran in those 20 years, I wonder if Jacob ever thought about his brother Esau. Did he remember tricking his brother from the birthright every time he had a bowl of lentil stew? Did he turn bright red with shame as he remembered dressing up like his brother in order to trick his father out of the blessing? And there's only one question in Jacob's mind right now after 20 years. How's my brother Esau going to respond as we get back together? As we see each other? Well, Jacob sent word that he's coming. And Esau says, no problem, I'm going to travel and I'm going to take some men with me. And I'll meet you. And Jacob panics, and for good reason, because in his mind, it can only mean one thing. Esau's coming for revenge. For why else would you travel with 400 men? Jacob's still angry after all these years, and here's some steps that we see in our text. He divides his people into two groups. Look at verses 7 and 8, if you will. Chapter 32, 7 and 8. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought, if Jacob comes and attacks one group that is left may escape. Now, what is Jacob's reasoning here? What's his reasoning?
Won't get all of us.
Won't get all of us. Yeah. Some of us he might get, and some of us hopefully will get away. Right? Does that make good military sense? Split the groups up. Yeah. Why would you want to lose everybody all at once? If you only lost half your people, you still got half your people left. All right? Now, what does that show us in splitting up the groups of people, splitting up the animals? What's that show us?
That he had concern.
A concern for what? You're right. Well, who's he concerned about?
Losing what he had.
Yeah, he's concerned about his family. He's willing to risk half of them while saving the other half. Now, after the last couple weeks, which half do you think he's more willing to save? The half that includes who? Rachel. Yeah. We don't read that. I might be reading too much into it, but I think that's the one he'd be willing to save. All right? And so it's desperate for him. All right, so he splits them up. Number 2, he prays to God for guidance. Dale, if you got 9 through 12 for us there.
Then Jacob prayed, O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am worthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, I will surely make you prosper, and will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted.
All right, what do we see here in these verses? What do we see?
He's reaching out to God.
All right, he's reaching out to God. In fact, it's the first recorded prayer for Jacob, and what a great, powerful prayer it is here. All right, in this prayer, he recalls the promise God made to Isaac and Abraham. He confesses his unworthiness. He declares God's undeserved goodness to him. He prays for deliverance from Esau. He states his fear that the mother and the children will be attacked. And he reminds God again of the promise to bless him. I mean, what a great prayer here that he offers.
Could have used it for your sermon this morning.
Yeah. And so he divides the family, he prays, and he offers gifts to Esau to turn away his anger. Mike, you have 13 through 21 for us, please.
So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau, 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, pass on ahead of me and put a space between Esau to find him. And you shall say, moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he thought, I may appease him with the presence that goes ahead of me, and afterwards I shall see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp.
All right, what's Jacob doing here? What's he doing? All right, trying to butter his brother up. That's a good way to say it. Anything else he's doing?
Peace offering.
Being what?
Peace offering.
He's offering something of a peace offering there. Let me throw out a big churchy word that's happening here. It's the word propitiation, which simply means to turn away wrath by offering a gift. Many times, us as husbands do that. If we're running late or been working a lot of hours, we might stop to get a box of chocolate or some flowers to take home as a propitiation. For you can only stay in the doghouse so long. But Jacob is offering much more than flowers here. He's offering these goats and ewes and rams and camels, and they're young, and bulls and donkeys, and I mean, Mike read the list there for us. But what message is Jacob sending by offering such a large gift of animals to his brother? What's the message he's sending?
Please forgive me.
Please forgive me. Okay, that would be a message. What's the message?
I know I cheated you before.
Okay, I've cheated you, I messed up. It's been 20 years. All right.
It's also a show of his strength.
His strength, his prosperity. I have these to give. It's not like I'm hurting. Okay? Jacob he truly wants fellowship with his brother, doesn't he? And he's offering these animals. He recognizes the enormous sin that he did against his brother years ago. And I believe he's also recognizing Esau's greatness by offering him this great gift. This gift of animals. So you got 20 long years. But you can't buy forgiveness. Right? What's Jacob's motives then in sending these animals? What's his motive?
Maybe his brother would lighten up.
All right, maybe my brother will lighten up and turn away from any anger that he might have. Mike?
I lean toward regret. I think he regrets what he did.
Okay. That Jacob regrets what he did? Okay. Skim back to verse 20. Verse 20. And be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind you, for he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending on ahead. And when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with sending gifts? Nothing, right? He's making a good gesture. It's really biblical, right? Sending gifts to turn away wrath. Back to our word propitiation. It's one of the Greek words used to describe the death of Christ in Romans chapter 3 and 1 John chapter 2. On a relational level, a gift opens the way for the giver and ushers them into the presence of the great from Proverbs chapter 18. And that's what Jacob is hoping for. But here's where I see a problem. Jacob is still thinking in terms of the human level, of maybe of revenge, maybe of appeasement. It's like he's trying to buy his brother's love with these gift of animals. And And the last thing that Esau needs is more what? He don't need no more animals. He's got animals. But Jacob thinks, wow, this should blow him away. Bob?
Well, Jacob, he's still very self-centered.
Mhm.
He really isn't concerned about how it hurt his brother.
Yeah.
It's about him.
Yeah. Maybe I'll pacify him with these gifts. You know, these animals. Take care of it. Kind of sweep it under and we'll go on as if nothing happened. There. You know.
I don't know if he really cares about wanting to have a relationship with Esau. He just doesn't want to pay for his sins.
Yeah. Yeah. They'd like to maybe, have conversation with him.
But he could have done that within 20 years.
Yeah, true.
He's being forced
True.
upon him now.
Yes.
So now he's in panic mode.
Yes, he
If
is.
he really wanted a relationship, he would have
Reached out a whole
a
lot.
whole lot earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then we see Jacob at Jabbok. Verse 22 to 32. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he went over all the possessions. And so Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched from wrestling with the man. And the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God, with humans, and have overcome." And Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." And the sun rose above him and past Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore to the day the Israelites did not eat the tendon that attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Well, here is where Jacob spends that fateful night. What words would you use to describe Jacob's emotional state here? What would you use to describe his emotional state? There are some words. His emotional state. He is what?
Sleep.
Huh?
Didn't get much sleep.
All right, didn't get much sleep.
Anxious.
Anxious. In distress. Fearful, I wrote down. Guilt-ridden. Worried. Alarmed. And he wrestles that night with this stranger, this mysterious stranger. They have this wrestling match. And by the next morning, what 3 new things does Jacob have?
A new name.
All right, he's got a new name.
New blessing.
New blessing.
Hip.
Huh?
That hip really hurt.
All right, he's got a new limp. Right? He's got a new name, a new limp, a new confidence from the blessing from God. What do you think Jacob learned in that wrestling match? What did he learn? No, I don't always win, but he was winning. That amazes me. He was winning. And then daybreak kind of broke up the match.
I think you would have learned that you can have a close relationship with God, and that's what God wants, even if it's just wrestling.
And I think God here is teaching that there's no need to fear, and there's no need to play games anymore, Jacob. And Jacob wasn't sure how Esau would respond, but after wrestling with the angel all night, it really didn't matter to him anymore. And so Jacob and Esau meet at last. They meet at last. Chapter 33, 1 through 4. Jacob looked up, and there he saw Esau coming with 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him and threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Well, the time has come. The problem has arisen for Jacob, and he can either run from it and keep running, or he can embrace it and meet it head on. So what does Jacob do when he comes to his brother? What does he do when he meets Esau? He bows down. Now what is interesting is really that was the appropriate way to greet a monarch. Do you remember what Jacob had called Esau when he sent a gift to him? My what? Remember the word he used when he sent the gift ahead? He used the word my Lord. My Lord. And so he bows. And Jacob refers to himself as thy servant. By bowing down, I think Jacob is admitting his guilt and begging for forgiveness. Well, how does Esau respond? How does he respond after all these years? He runs.
Not seeking revenge.
Okay. And we don't see running a lot by men in the Bible. He embraces his brother, it says. They kiss, and they cry. What the text tells us there. Now Jacob has lived in dread of seeing his brother. And so at the same time, God's working on Esau's heart, leading him to a place of forgiveness. So Jacob comes and he just bows 5, 6, 7 times. And Esau doesn't respond that way. He says, fool with that. He runs and hugs and kisses and cries. And so they meet. Bob?
It's kind of reminiscent of the story of the prodigal son.
Yeah. Kind of fits right there, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure
The
does.
father runs.
Run and kiss him, embrace him.
Yeah.
He loved him, brother.
Yep. And so they finally meet. But forgiveness is given, not earned. Forgiveness is given, not earned. We'll pick up the story in verse 5. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and the children. Who are these with you? He asked. Jacob answered, these are the children God has graciously given your servant. Then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed. Last of all, Joseph and Rachel, they came and they bowed. And Esau said, what's the meaning of all the flocks and the herds I met? To find favor in your eyes, my Lord. Esau said, I've already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. No, please, said Jacob, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need. And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. We'll pause our story there. Now, what does Jacob want? What's he want here?
He wants the love of his brother.
Okay, he wants the love of his brother, and he wants Esau to do what?
Forgive him.
All right, forgive him. Accept the gifts as well. All right. What does Esau not want? need any more animals. It's nice. All right. It's like a couple weeks ago when I got another pair of socks at Christmas. I always use socks, but I mean another pair to go with the other pair and the other pairs.
Still wearing last year's, are you?
Yeah, don't tell anybody. Probably the years before.
No.
Oh, I gotta wash them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, Jacob sent gifts to earn forgiveness, but he's learning from his brother that forgiveness is a free gift. But it's Jacob, and so we got one final deception. He's got one more sleeve, or one more trick up his sleeve, verse 12 through 17. Then Esau said, "Let us be on our way. I'll accompany you." But Jacob said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are tender and that I must care for the ewes and the cows that are nursing their young. If they are driven hard just one day, all the animals will die. So let my Lord go on ahead of his servant while I move along slowly at the pace of my flock and herds before me, and the pace of my children until I come to my Lord and Seir." And Esau said, "Then let me leave some of my men with you." "Well, why do that?" Jacob asked. "Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." So that day Esau started on his way back to Seir. Jacob, however, went to Succoth, where he built a place for himself and made shelters for his livestock. That is why the place is called Succoth. And after Jacob came from Paddan Aram, he arrived safely at the city of Shechem in Canaan and camped within sight of the city. For 100 pieces of silver he brought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, the plot of ground where he pitched his tent. There he set up an altar and called it El Elor Israel. What does Esau bag? What does he bag of his brother? What's Esau want him to do? What's he want Jacob to do here?
Let's go home.
Huh?
Let's go home.
Yeah, come on home with me. I want you to come live. Come be. Let's be a family. All right? What does Jacob do? All right, makes excuses. He deceives his brother one more time, and he goes to Succoth while Esau goes to Seir. And here we see Jacob's old nature is still running the show. Even after forgiveness, and after reconciliation, and after the gift had been accepted, and the hugs and the tears, Jacob still can't believe that everything was okay between he and his brother. Maybe he didn't care, but he can't believe it. He can't believe that Esau would just say, "Come on home with me."
It's because he wouldn't forgive him.
Yeah.
If it was in the other way, he wouldn't forgive Esau. So how can he expect anybody? And that's our failure also.
Yeah.
We don't forgive others, so we can't expect to get forgiven.
Yeah. We wrestle with this stuff, don't we? There. What do we learn? That reconciliation is difficult. After 20 years, there's cultural differences, there are emotional differences that are tough to overcome. We see Jacob and Esau maybe couldn't roll back the clock, the time of the hands of the clock, like nothing even happened. And we see proof of Jacob's sincerity when he builds an altar to God there in verses 18 through 20. He worships God, he praises God for his forgiveness, for bringing him home and restoring his relationship with Esau. But he's still blown away that his brother would just say, "Come on home." Because Mike's already said, Jacob probably wouldn't have done that at all. So as our time is getting away from us today, what do we learn from chapter 32 and chapter 33? What are some things that we learn?
Don't wait to reconcile.
Okay, don't wait.
Move ahead because there's a lot, a lot of peace in the fact that you reconciled from
Okay.
once they came together.
Okay. Yep. What else did we learn?
I hadn't really thought about before, like Mike said, Jacob couldn't forgive him. We see that with his relationship with Laban because he constantly brings up all the wrongs that Laban has done, and he's not able to overcome that. But then something else that I heard years ago, and I've never forgotten, when Jacob wrestles with the angel of the Lord, and when we encounter God, our walk should be different. We don't see that right away with Jacob. We see it later, but his physical walk was different, but our walk should be different.
Yeah. Good point.
In Jacob's prayer that you mentioned and all the good things, he never asked God for forgiveness. He just recognizes how he's not worthy and how awesome God is, but that intimacy of God, forgive me what I've done. I don't think Jacob forgave himself, and therefore now he still has a strained relationship with Esau, and it's completely on him because he can't accept forgiveness from him. So
Yeah.
I think what we learn is how powerful forgiveness is on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah. To forgive and to be forgiven, as we asked at the beginning of our time today. Yeah. What's more difficult, to be forgiven or to forgive?
What's a greater blessing? It's just our both.
Yeah. Yeah. There. I wrote down a couple things that we can learn. Sometimes it's more difficult to be forgiven than to forgive. See that here in our text today. Accepting forgiveness requires a deep humility and enormous courage. As long as we live in fear, we can neither forgive nor be forgiven. And healing begins when we confess our sins and accept God's forgiveness, that He forgives us. There. Well, earlier we mentioned, oh, go ahead, Eli. No, go ahead.
I'll tell you that David said, "My sin is forever before me." And I think I know I'm that way. If I've done somebody or did something wrong, even though I know that the Lord has forgiven me, I cannot forget the sin or the situation that did everything in me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can only imagine the feelings that the two brothers had as they were apart, because it was on their minds all the time. I mean, maybe it wasn't, but it probably was. And you lament over it, and time goes by, and it just makes it worse in some respects than to just come back together and show forgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah, why did it wait 20 years? I mean, we don't know. But it took that long. I guess to stretch out the text. Well, we already mentioned the prodigal son and the dad that runs, and reminded me of a story that I heard years ago of a young son that didn't like living at home, didn't like the rules that mom and dad had set in place, and so, too big for his britches, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to make it on my own, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And so he left one day. Well, he quickly found out the road is a tough place. Months and years later, he decided one night to sit down and write a letter to his parents. And in that letter, he said, "I want to come home." don't know if you'll forgive me. And so when I'm on the train and it comes around the bend by the house, if you forgive me, I want you to put some white strips in the oak tree out back. And I'll know as I pass the house that I can get off at the next stop and come home because you'll forgive me. And he sent that letter, and he waited a few weeks and decided it was time to come home. He got on a train and he started that trip. Next to him was an older gentleman, and he began to tell that gentleman his story. And as they got closer to the bend near the house, he put his hands in his face and he told the gentleman, I can't look out the window. And so I want you to tell me as we go by if you see some white strips hanging in the old oak tree out back of the yellow house. It's the third house after the bend. And he just sat there. And the train went and went and went. And finally the young man took his hands away from his face and he looked at the older gentleman and he said, what did you see? Did you see any strips of white in the oak tree? The old man looked at him and said, I didn't see an oak tree, for it was covered completely in toilet paper. You see, his parents just didn't want to throw out a couple strips of white linen and say, come on home. They covered that oak tree completely white to tell their son, you are completely forgiven. Come home. That's the story I think we see. Next week we'll be in 34 through 36 or somewhere in there. Either some of it, all of it, or a little bit of it. So read ahead. Father, thank you for our time together. Help us to reconcile those differences in our lives and not wait. Thank you that you forgive us as we seek after you. Bless us this day. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you.
So what's your plans in that? I have what you're going to do today. I'm not sure. He's on your recipe now. Yeah. But I don't
Oh, good. Your brother doesn't, so I have to yell at him. I'll forgive him, though. Huh? Yeah, we give it to Whitney then, so she can put it in next week's bulletin. No, usually he just puts the board back in the closet, and then I have to put it up on the board, but that's fine.
Then you get up and then you can't go back.
That's fine, I see it now.
First round. Probably wasn't a fan.
Oh, goodness.
Hearing everything. But, you know, that.
Tommy.
We had her go.
Well, it sounded better yesterday than it did Friday. If his name wanted to come up with his number, I wanted to know what I was talking to him Friday.
Maggie.
Correct. So I pulled out the emergency sermon. That's what you'll get.
So that was.
Luckily, I got Rick and Quinn to do the songs, so I don't have to do that. I already had this arranged stuff for the class part, so that was easy. Yeah.
Upset about the fact that she got hurt. And people were paying attention to her and continuing asking about it. That was not physical pain, it's emotional pain. That's what we learned yet to get.
And then when she cries, then people ask more.
More. What's going on with you?
Yeah.
You know, and kept saying,
No, it hurt. How bad does it hurt? It must hurt pretty bad.
does it hurt at all?
See,
Why are you crying? I do.
Maggie got hurt, he said.
It wasn't a big deal.
Sprained leg.
Yeah.
I missed a lot on it. This did not work out.
And then she's dressing varsity now.
She's what?
Dressing varsity for basketball, which is a big thing. Yeah. Last year. Of course, she didn't play at all in the first game. This game was pretty good. They put her in the last 2 minutes. So it was like the third game. We were worried about her ankle. Last game is roll it again after you roll it. That's what you really said. But she played, she made her moves. That first, she sat around for like an hour, right?
Yeah.
Previous game, this one was over an hour that you're just sitting around and don't think like you did, and you're all nervous. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, she's just nothing good. Nothing good. That's okay. First experience.
Well, she learned it. Tell me to become more mature. Experience is tough on how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting thing. She's not used to sitting a whole game and then just going in. That's all she'll probably ever have this year. It's like, well, somehow you gotta learn to be ready. At the end of the game, there's a chance to go in. Prep yourself for it. Which she might really well do. Really good. She, in the freshman game, I think she was leading. She made 2 3-pointers. She had never. She made her first one even before. She never even attempted one. She probably did attempt it, but she was so nervous. She's getting finally as confident. First 89. She's still struggling with the breathe through her nose. That's gonna be the secret.
I was there, we talked about that a while back.
So this was her second race. She gets through some portion of it. She switches back to her other.
Half the guy already.
Completely breathe every night. So what's up with Russell?
He wasn't talking very well Wednesday.
Yeah, Friday before he does the thing on Facebook, the whatever you call it, I don't remember. But anyway, he was having troubles, and then at the end he said, "I'm not feeling very good." He's home still. Matt said Russell called him Friday. Matt said, for one, for the caller ID, he wouldn't have well called me. Because Russell didn't sound like Russell. So.
Monster cold.
Could be the monster cold or she had it. So.
Monster cold.
That's what they would call it. It's a cold that lasted about 3 weeks. And the cough that just started out normal with the sinus drainage of the sore throat, the runny nose, and then went into his cough.
And that
I had it in December.
I had it.
He didn't get it, I guess.
I don't want
I guess we avoided that. Okay, Emerson. For you.
Emerson's what would have a car seat. Babysitter for him. Our playmate.
My playmate, yeah.
He likes to